This week I've got X-Men Dark Phoenix, which is just a big old pile of yikes. I love the X-Men movies. Like, I think they're so great. It's been 20 years of X-Men movies, and I give them credit for really, I think, like, rebooting the interest in the superhero genre, which I also blame them for, because now we've had this inundation of superhero movie after superhero movie after superhero movie. And I wish the X-Men films had gone out on Logan. Like, that would have been a perfect bookend, chapter closing, etc. to, you know, these characters we've loved. We already have two casts, basically, except for Wolverine. You know, he is the one person who has survived all the franchises. But, I was just so disappointed by Dark Phoenix, and I'm guessing that a little bit of it has to do with the whole, like, you know, potential of the Marvel/Disney acquisition, and so they were like, what's happening here? And there's been all this weirdness, like, historically of, like, oh, well, you know, we can't call them mutants in the Marvel movies, and we, you know, can't reference anything else, and it's just weird to have the X-Men separated from that rest of that universe, but they've always kind of held their own because they are also an ensemble. So part of the problem with Dark Phoenix is one of probably the hardest storylines to tell in a one movie, like, arc. It is complicated. It is convoluted to a degree. It is just, I feel like it needs more time than just a 2-hour movie can give it. And they sort of tried to do Dark Phoenix in X3, which I actually was rewatching a little bit of it for the first time in, I think, like, however many years, like 15 years the other day. And I was like, oh, this was not that much better, but I actually felt like it was still better. So this is the James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender cast. So you've got James McAvoy as Professor X, Michael Fassbender as Magneto, and then Jennifer Lawrence is back as Mystique, Nicholas Hoult is Beast, Tye Sheridan is Cyclops, Alexandra Shipp is Storm, who, oh my god, was so underused. Like, Storm is one of my favorite X-Men, and she just does not get used in this. Kodi Smit-McPhee is back as Nightcrawler, Evan Peters is Quicksilver, and then, most importantly, you have Sophie Turner as Jean Grey. And this could have been, again, this movie had so much potential, which is also why it's so frustrating, because this could have been a great, awesome, like, centerpiece film around one of the female heroes for once. You know, Jean Grey is one of the actual best X-Men, eventually became one of the coolest, best X-Men. There's something about, like, her intro, and it was just like, look, boys, I've got a girl joining the team, and that's just pathetic. But they eventually made her into the super badass, almost all-powerful character. I don't know if Sophie Turner was just, like, distracted coming off of Game of Thrones or just phoning it in, or I felt like most people were phoning it in, which is a shame. I'll excuse Nicholas Hoult from that. I actually thought he tried his best to emote in his blue Beast makeup as he could. And James McAvoy, I feel like, was trying maybe, but if that was his trying, then we may need to revisit casting him in future things. Convoluted storyline. This is in the trailers, the first few minutes, but basically a force inhabits Jean Grey and she turns potentially dark. And then you've also got Jessica Chastain as something, and I won't spoil it, but Jessica Chastain, another absolutely squandered talent, such a great actress. I will spoil it a tiny bit in that I thought she was going to be playing Emma Frost because she just looks like she should be Emma Frost. And they've already, I mean, she said they've all kind of spoiled a little bit that is not who she is playing. The fights were boring. They love doing these train fights, like these fights that take place on a train corridor. And, like, I feel like it's, you know, it's supposed to be an enclosed space to, like, show off their powers and have constraints. But there's really just it's boring. It's just this movie, like, hits a lull very early on and then just sticks with it. I don't really care about the characters anymore, or I do care about the characters, which is the sad thing, but I don't care about these iterations of the characters. So action is not very great. Character development is mediocre at best. The lead is not wanting to be there. It feels like everyone else doesn't seem to want to be there. It's tough. It was tough. You know, it wasn't the worst X-Men movie I've seen, because, like, in the vein of rewatching things, X-Men Origins Wolverine was on, and I was like, oh, this is rough. But it is certainly not the best by far. And again, it's Magneto has an amazing line that summarizes at the end. And I won't do the full thing but when you hear this line and he goes, something, nobody cares. I was like, there has never been a better summary of how everyone about this making this film feels about this film, and how everyone watching this film is probably going to eventually feel about this film. So also, man, just on a scale of 1 to what the hell is going on with the actual X-Men timeline? Like, nothing makes any sense, you know, in terms of everybody aging. Okay, fine, sure, let's assume that mutants age slower. Doesn't explain to me how James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender's characters get to Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen's stage like 10, 15 years later. Like something horrific must happen to them in between. And not that they're trying to necessarily even solve for this timeline, because I know like Days of Future Past confuses things a little bit, but it's frustrating and annoying. And like whoever is the overall story editor for the X-Men films is fired. No, they're probably actually fired because or are not continuing to keep their job because of the Marvel acquisition. So that's fine, whatever. And then the thing that's so frustrating, that also in addition to like, okay, I have no idea where or when we are, it's like the first few reboot-ish movies, or not even reboot, but like the younger cast prequel, it's so confusing, but the James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender version, they've done a pretty decent job of being like, okay, cool, we're in the 70s, everyone's going to dress kind of 70s-ish. Okay, cool, we're in like the 80s, let's put some 80s flair in this. This takes place mostly in the 90s, and I don't see anything to indicate that. I didn't see like a single like puka shell necklace or like, I don't know, like Jinko jeans or something like that. And that might be a little later in the 90s, but it doesn't matter. They could have been dressed like they were today, and it wouldn't have made a difference. So what's the point of setting it then? What's the point? Like, why even tell us when it is, just to confuse us in terms of like the other timelines? I don't know what the logic there was. Honestly, I'm sad that this was the bookend for this, but I'm glad to see it go. It's time. Rejoin the have the X-Men rejoin the Avengers, bring them into the Marvel fold. Before I was kind of against it, but now I'm like, you know what, just do it. And I'm also going to make a prediction / a hope. Like the only way to solve this, I think, is House of M. And having Scarlet Witch, who is, they couldn't call her a mutant, and they couldn't acknowledge that she's Magneto's daughter in the Avengers movies because they didn't own the X-Men properties. She reality warps and like explain this was all House of M or something horrible like that. Like just wipe this away, but bring the X-Men back. Please do it right. Please recast everybody. Maybe with the possible exception of Wolverine. Like, I would be fine if Wolverine came back as Hugh Jackman, but not because I thought Logan was like a beautiful send-off. So, X-Men Dark Phoenix. Look, you're also... but here's the thing. I say all of this. If you're an X-Men fan, you're gonna see it anyway, most likely. Like, what else are you gonna do? You have to. It's one of those things. They got you. It's 20 years. 20 years of your investment. Like, you're gonna go see it. So... be warned, I went with really low expectations. I was still disappointed. I'm going to keep noting things like, just thinking about it again, the effects weren't that great. The fights weren't that great. The villain, situation was just mediocre. It's middling. It was middling, but that makes it disappointing. So I'm only going to give it 1.7 out of 5. Like, that's how sad I was about this. The other film I have this week is opening in a somewhat limited capacity, but since I am a Bay Area person, I feel obligated to kind of shout it out a little bit. But it's The Last Black Man in San Francisco, and this movie has been hyped for me since Sundance, which was back in January. So, it's been a long time coming, and it had a lot to live up to, and unfortunately, I think the hype did not help. Every few years I would almost say every year there's a movie that comes out of Sundance and everyone's like, oh my God, it's the greatest, and cinema has been remade and reborn and revitalized. And this year it felt like a lot of people were saying that was The Last Black Man in San Francisco. So I was really excited to see it. It's good. I will absolutely acknowledge it's good. They keep hyping up the fact that the director is a fourth generation San Franciscan, which, okay, that doesn't necessarily make you a great filmmaker. That just makes you a fourth-generation San Franciscan, and you better have rent control or own a property there. So the story is around this character, Jimmie, who it's also based on the actor's kind of real life a little bit. So his family loses the home he grew up in, or I don't think they ever owned it necessarily. Oh no, I think they maybe owned it. But they lose the home, this beautiful Victorian house that he grew up in, and he is just obsessed with this house and dreams of getting it back. And he hasn't exactly been through like great times, and he has this really wonderful friend who's played by Jonathan Majors, who I thought he was the best performance in this entire film. I was like blown away by him. He plays his best friend Mont, and so part of it is like the two of them just like chilling, and I thought the parts about their friendship were actually the strongest, where it's like, wow, you really want that friend who like will do anything for you. And I feel like that is Mont to Jimmie. I don't know if it's Jimmie for Mont. And then, it's just kind of like little vignette-ish moments around San Francisco. Mike Epps is in it, Danny Glover, Finn Witrock, who, when he comes on screen, I was just like, oh God, this guy. Because he's just the most, like, I'm sure he's a nice person, or I'm hoping he's a nice person. He's just the most, like, generic white, like, frat bro douche guy you've ever seen. And he's perfect at playing these roles. Like, he's played nicer roles too, but he's just perfect at like playing into that stereotype. Thora Birch is in it for a few minutes. I feel like I should have liked this movie more than I did. It's well shot. They clearly understand San Francisco neighborhoods, and it's cool to see like San Francisco portrayed in a beautiful light in some ways. You know, it talks about a lot of the changes in terms of gentrification and like pushing out like, I'm going to say vaguely native population. Some of the things that I feel like we're missing are like, if you're going to talk about modern day San Francisco, talking about also the fact that like, there's a mental health care crisis and like, it's just like San Francisco is not the cleanest, greatest place to be right now. And I feel like we see San Francisco in this and like, and there are other issues it addresses in a similar vein. But like, for me, it was just seeing San Francisco in such a clean way was the most bizarre part of it. Because if you walk in San Francisco, which I do almost every day, like you're going to encounter somebody who needs help. And doesn't just need help trying to reclaim their giant, massive, beautiful Victorian home. There's more to it than that, but I just felt like this is actually in its own way, and of course it's a movie, so that makes sense, but it's a sanitized version of the city. That being said, beautifully shot. I thought Jonathan Majors is amazing in this. All the performances are great. Not everybody is like an actor or an actor we are familiar with, so I thought that was really cool. But for me, it got overhyped. I also don't know, I'm not saying this like that it doesn't have appeal outside of the Bay Area, but there is a certain element of it that is like very SF heavy. And I don't know if it's just because I saw it in the city at like the premiere here and everyone was like super amped about that. But I'm like, I wonder how like if other people will understand the kind of the issue at the core of it. And they'll of course understand the friend dynamics and family dynamics. Like Danny Glover plays Mont's dad, and I think he does a great job. It's one of my favorite Danny Glover performances. However, I think it is worth checking out. It is a little tough also though that it is coming out in the summer and there's just a deluge of other films. If it sounds interesting to you, I definitely think it's a break from blockbusters, but I would go in with like tempered expectations because I think it hurts it to be like, this is the next greatest film. So I'm going to give it 3.8 out of 5.